Welcome to week 6. I'm going to offer a little bit of perspective on the two articles we're going to read this week, and I'll start with Colander and Dahlin from 2011. Their article is entitled "Following the Fashionable Friend, the Power of Social Media, Publicity Effectiveness of Blogs versus Online Magazines." This article's authors researched and compared the effects of brand publicity in social and what is more traditional digital media. The authors, no surprise, found that blogs generated higher brand attitudes and purchase intentions. Now, I said it's no surprise, but the real question is why? Well, the effect can partially be explained by what's known as higher parasocial interaction. That parasocial interaction, sometimes known as PSI, is the familiarity that a reader has with a blogger. Okay, they don't really know them in person, which is why it's parasocial, but they feel like they know them. And so that familiarity helps lend credibility to that brand whenever a blogger has something positive to say about that brand. Now, based upon the author's findings, they provide some more implications as well as a new architecture for the media and marketing industries. So some very good research there, kind of cutting edge in terms of how bloggers influence brand versus online magazines. Our second reading this week is from Koshik, written in 2015. That's entitled "Crushing It with Competitive Intelligence Analysis. Best Metrics and Reports." Really good information in this article about the power of proactively identifying which of your competitors' strategies are working well, where their customers come from, and what specific tactics you should consider or maybe even experiment with to create an advantage for yourself. You're trying to create an advantage for yourself through the use of metrics. It's not about capturing metrics for metrics' sake. There's more data out there than we can swim in. Right? We're swimming in pools of data. It's more important to focus on the data that will help you. Now, the authors call this deriving amazing, actionable insights. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read this article the first and the second time, I felt like I was on this very fast roller coaster of a ride. It's the writing style that the author uses, which kind of picks you up and gauges you throughout this sea of metrics, which is refreshing because unless you're a mathematician or a statistician, perhaps data is not your most interesting subject. But this author does a really good job of making it interesting and has this conversation in a way that I think is compelling in terms of the data that we can use. Now, one specific example of the advice offered is to always ask your vendor, or if you're doing the data yourself, ask two questions. How do you collect data? And what is the sample size? Those are two very important questions. Lots of other questions, but the author recommends starting with those because that'll give you a sense of how valid that data is and how that data may or may not be helpful for your organization. Another good article, or another good insight from this article, is the reminder that data show about your site is not that interesting by itself. The best use of competitive intelligence, or CI data, is to contextually compare and contrast your data with that of your competitors. You can also look at your own data and that of others over time to identify trends that should be addressed. As you read the articles, I also encourage you to pay careful attention to each of the section that is labeled, "So what do you do with this data?" When you get to that part, "So what do you do with this data?" put yourself in the position of using the data. What would you do with it? Pretend that you are briefing your organizational leaders on data that you collect. What would you do with this data? Answer that WIIFM question. What's in it for me? That's true for all communication, including communication about metrics and media analytics. Well, that's it for now. Again, stay ahead with all assignments. You've all done really well there. Stay engaged in the discussion board. Again, you've done really well there. Most of all, enjoy this time of learning.